Hi, I'm John Wilcock, and my book is The Autobiography and Sex Life of Andy Warhol. It was the first biography of that enigmatic artist, but it's not actually an autobiography, nor is there that much talk of sex in it. What the book is a series of about 20 different people close to Andy Warhol at the end of the 60s, all trying to, quotes, explain him. A lot of people really misunderstood him then, and indeed still do, although there's hardly a day when Andy's name is not mentioned in the paper. He's become a kind of icon, kind of representative of what the 60s were. I'm somewhat of an expert on Andy. I spent a lot of time around him. I went up to what he called the factory, his studio, 2 or 3 times a week in the 60s and partly the 70s. And I went with them to make at least half a dozen of the first 10 or 12 movies they made. And I hadn't known Andy for more than a year or two when he called me up one day, and this time he was bitching about how he couldn't get the money to go to Hollywood. Nobody would finance him to go and make a big movie. And anybody who knows Andy knows how starstruck he was. He was fascinated by movie stars and Hollywood and glamour in general. And I said, well, Andy, I said, all my friends do underground papers. Why don't you do a paper? And he said, what kind of a paper? And I said, well, Andy, obviously you'd do a film paper. So the subsequence of that was that he actually did start this paper Interview. One of the things you learned very quickly was that one didn't try to interview Andy. If you did, you'd get answers like, well, what do you think? Or something totally non-committal. And the reason why I got a book out eventually was that I was so curious about what was going on that nobody seemed to have any answers to, that I started to tape record people that I thought might have answers. I remember one day particularly asking somebody why they were making a movie. I think the movie was called Horse or something like that, and they had hauled a horse up and set the movie sort of in front of the freight elevator so that everybody who came up in the freight elevator passed through the movie. And this really intrigued me, and I couldn't figure out whether it was accidental or whether it was planned or what. Eventually I began to learn that nothing was really planned. Andy was just very brilliant at taking advantage of whatever the circumstances were. Andy taught me an awful lot about life. I learned that artists and poets who hang around together basically tell the future, and even though they maybe explain it in words or in images that you're not quite clear about, somebody interprets that, and to some extent I felt that was my role, to hang around artists and try and explain what I thought was some of the meaning. So Andy was a great influence on my life, and of course, as has since proved, a great influence on everybody's life.